Welcome to Empower You, everybody. It's great to see so many people logging in tonight. This is really our first ever complete webinar session. I hope it goes great. But for those of you who have never attended an Empower You session before or been to Empower You studio in Cincinnati, it's great to have you. Empower You is just a series of free seminars that are meant to do one thing, and that's to help you become more empowered in your lives by helping you to get educated, learn about new things, enjoy, have fun in your life, and engage, get involved in important topics. Like this semester, we talked about the important topic of issue 7, which I hope all of you in Hamilton County are going to vote on. So for those of you who are new to Empower You, you can always, during this kind of crazy time where we've had to move some classes and cancel and add classes, you can always go to empoweruohio.org to check out our schedule. So normally what I like to do at the beginning of every class that's live, what I love to do is to be able to pass out an article, talk about something that has happened that week or that might be interesting to you. And there was one thing that really came to my attention this week that I wanted to share with you. And that's the death of somebody who in my mind is just a really important person. And that's Senator Tom Coburn. The world needs more leaders like him. It's just that simple. He was an Oklahoma Republican who embodied financial stewardship. He always showed great respect. He was a doctor, and he always was concerned about our hard-earned tax dollars. He earned the nickname of Dr. No for confronting members of both parties and blocking fiscal irresponsible legislation. Washington could just use more people like him. One of the most interesting things about Senator Coburn was he specifically stopped his Senate term to 2 terms of 6 years, 12 years, because he thought that as a citizen legislator, that's all he should have to serve his country for, and he should be able to go back to Oklahoma and deliver babies, which is a remarkable thing. I remember, I think it was in 2011 when we were working on a balanced budget initiative. One day I was sitting in my office and he called me, and it was a shock. And he just warned me about how hard the fight was to get anything, to do anything in the years of Congress. And it was like, I felt like Senator Coburn was warning me about the perils of the swamp. And believe me, I surely found them. But it was so sad to me last week when I read that he had died from prostate cancer at the age of 72. I want to say hi to our team out there tonight. Betty Overstreet, our great executive director, Bill Roll, our treasurer, Joe Platt, kind of our political guru, and Jay Grunke, our producer. I miss seeing you guys in the studio and hope that we can get back to it soon. But speaking of more classes, we've added one more class, and it's Thursday night, 2 days from now. Many of you know I own a small business. And when this whole thing hit where we got shut down, it was a week ago last Monday. To be honest with you, it was the first time anything like this had happened to me in 37 years, and it was scary. And so I started to kind of try to figure out what this whole stimulus bill was all about. And my good friend, Chris Finney, who I've done a lot of things with over the years, called me and said, listen, I've published an article about it. He sent it over to me. I'd read many articles about the stimulus bill, and Chris's was the only one I could understand. So he said, hey, how about I come on and do an Empower You Thursday night and explain to everybody that has a small business. It could be a one-person proprietorship. It could be somebody with a 1099, an independent contractor maybe. He said, I want to explain this bill, and I want people to be ready to go because this bill is going to provide cash to people that need cash to restart their businesses. So Thursday night, Chris Finney and really a team of 3 other experts will be joining Empower You to go over the CARES Act, which is the bill that is supposed to be providing help to small business owners. I think it's $2.2 trillion. Chris is a great speaker. You'll love joining him, and I hope to see you there. The only other thing I wanted to let you know about was after we got shut down last week, gosh, I got this call, and it was just like you give one thing, you take another. But the Council of Aging called us from Hamilton County. They serve 4 counties. They serve about 20,000 seniors, and asked us if we put together a fillthetruck.org program to collect personal care items for seniors. Gosh, we don't have any employees there. How are we going to do this? We managed to put together a great program to help provide 7,500 boxes of personal care items to seniors in Butler, Hamilton, Clinton, and Warren County. If there's any way, if any of you feel compelled about that issue, please go to thetruck.org, consider making a donation of a personal care item or two, or there's 3 locations you can drop those items off to. So tonight, I've been just so excited about this class ever since I found out about Dr. Robert Epstein, and because I do business with people every day, and I can't always say that it's been that much fun over the last 15 years working with them. And so when I read about his research, it's something I felt you all needed to know about. I've got many people that come up to me and they say to me, you know, the election, there was fraud in the election. What are you going to do about it? Can you help me? And I've had many people over the years, you know, kind of research, you know, different people who weren't legally registered and protesting them and things like that. But I think one of my main concerns is can any company be in a position to literally change or redirect hundreds of thousands of votes in an election like we see coming up? So we're just fortunate to have Dr. Robert Epstein with us tonight. And Dr. Epstein is a senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology. He's also the former editor-in-chief of Psychology Today magazine. He's a PhD from Harvard, where he published 15 books on artificial intelligence, adolescence, and other topics, as well as more than 300 scientific and popular articles. Last night, a good friend of Empower You, a former board member, Ed Bell, called me. He said, this guy you're going to have Empower You tomorrow night, I heard him on Glenn Beck today. And he's written an article about how to stop the coronavirus. And so Dr. Epstein, at some point in the discussion tonight, after he talks about Google, we'll also talk about this incredible article he's written, which I've posted for you to read at empoweryouohio.org. With that being said, thank you very much for joining Empower You tonight, Dr. Epstein. We're glad to have you.
It's my pleasure, Dan. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope I'm coming through okay.
You are.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, hello to folks. I guess you're either all in Ohio or mainly in Ohio. Is that right?
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I've spoken in Ohio actually not long ago. A good friend of mine is named Tom Zawistowski, and he is head of the Tea Party group there. And so he's invited me, and he's actually become a good friend over a period of a couple of years. He had learned about research I've been doing on Google and other tech companies. And he said, wow, you know, we really need to know about this here in Ohio. So I have spoken there and look forward to going back again. I've found a lot of enthusiasm there and a lot of very, very nice people. So
and many people know Tom Z, Dr. Epstein.
That's right, Tom Z. That's what people call him. That's right, and he's a great guy. We're exactly the same age, we discovered, and it's yeah. I just hope Tom and his wife, whom I know, and I hope all their loved ones are doing okay. Let me just throw out a link here because I really want to get into talking about Google and the election. But if you are interested in that article that Dan mentioned, just go to howtostopthevirus.com, howtostopthevirus.com. And this is a very serious proposal on my part. And Glenn Beck yesterday was, wow, he was just great. He thinks the proposal is brilliant. That's his word, not mine. And in fact, I am in touch with some people at the White House about this, and I'm hoping President Trump will take the lead here. But the bottom line is not that we all need to wear masks. that's not really going to make much difference. Um, it's not even social isolation, which is not making much difference because all the numbers are just, increasing dramatically, including the number of deaths. The doubling rate, it's called the doubling rate, is getting faster, not slower. But there is a way to stop the virus, and that is universal testing, and that's what my article is about. Now, most countries couldn't possibly do this, but the United States, we have the resources. If we decide we're going to test all 334 million Americans, man, woman, and child, we could do it quickly. We could do it extremely quickly with a kind of disposable, one-time use device like those disposable pregnancy tests that you can get in the dollar store, for goodness sake. And we could develop and mass produce a little device like that literally within a few weeks. We have that capability. Again, most countries don't. And we could test everyone. And once you test everyone, you find out who the carriers are, whether they have symptoms or not. And then the carriers need to self-isolate. It's not our elderly people who need to self-isolate. That's absurd. It's the carriers. Once you isolate the carriers, all of them, guess what? There's no more transmission. The transmission stops instantly. How do I know that? Because this was done in a town in Italy just a few weeks ago, got written up by The Guardian just over a week ago. And they tested everyone in the whole town. They isolated all the carriers, and transmission stopped. Of course it stopped because the carriers were now separate from everyone else. So we're talking about self-isolation in the United States of maybe 1 million people. But once they isolate, then the rest of us, the other 330 million of us, can go back to life as normal. We can reopen our businesses and the theaters and the stadiums and the restaurants because the carriers are now isolated. So, the economy basically is saved almost overnight. And there's no more transmission, which means the virus itself burns itself out literally in a matter of weeks. In other words, those people are isolated. Some of them get sick, some have mild symptoms, some have serious symptoms. The point is that the virus has nowhere to go, and so the virus literally burns itself out in a matter of weeks. So, trying to get some traction on this idea. I am in touch with some folks at the White House. I am in touch with one of the members of the Trump family. And I'm just hoping that the president takes the lead on this because he really could save, millions of lives probably worldwide, and of course, save our economy quite quickly. Any other measure besides universal testing is a halfway measure. It's just a Band-Aid. And of course, at the moment, that's all we're doing is applying very, very, very expensive Band-Aids to this problem. This program I'm talking about would cost less than it costs us to run the census this year. So it's, it costs some money, but it's less than it costs to run the census. So you can check that out at howtostopthevirus.com.
Hey,
Now,
Dr. Epstein, can I ask you a question
Sure.
about that? So, and I want to throw it out there. Anybody that wants to ask a question tonight, just use the Q&A section of your webinar down at the bottom of your screen. Where would the people self-isolate themselves at?
Well, where they self-isolate would depend on their situation. Now, for example, two of my children came back from Spain 2 weeks ago. They had to self-quarantine. They literally walked down the stairs. They wiped off the railings with antiseptic wipes. They went into their bedrooms, and I didn't see them for 2 weeks. Every few hours I dropped off food and drinks at their doors. And so the point is, because they had their own bedrooms, they were able to do it that way. So it just depends on people's situation. In some cases, we'll have to step up. We'll have to get, hotel rooms for people, which they're doing right now, of course, in Los Angeles and New York. In some cases, we'll have to step up and help people to self-isolate. Now, obviously, if if all the members of a household are all carrying the virus, they just have to stay together. In other words, you can self-isolate in groups. That would work too. So you have to go case by case. But what I'm trying to say here is it's anything we do short of this is just a halfway measure. Whereas if we put all of our resources, energy, creativity, industrial capacity into just this one particular project, which is universal testing, we have the ability to do it and to do it quickly. And once we do it, the virus is dead and we can reopen our economy very quickly. What we're doing now, people keep talking about flattening the curve. People keep talking about a peak. There's no sign of that at all in the numbers. What's happening in the numbers worldwide is that the number of, not just the number of cases, but the number of deaths is doubling worldwide every 6 days. You can't explain that by increased testing. The number of deaths worldwide is doubling every 6 days. The curve is not flattening, it's getting steeper. In the United States, the number of deaths is doubling every 3 or 4 days. And as you know, in some areas, like New York City, the number of deaths is doubling even faster than that every 2 days, in some places every other day. So the curves are not flattening, the curves are getting steeper. Frankly, it makes me angry when I see our public officials over and over again on radio and television saying, "Oh well, it'll just be 2 more weeks." It's like that. It's like that old film, The Money Pit. You may remember with Tom Hanks, and it's a great, great film where this couple buys an old house and they bring in some contractors who are going to, help them renovate the old house. And week after week, month after month, um, you know, Tom Hanks's character keeps asking the contractor, "When are you going to finish?" And the contractor goes, "3 weeks." And he keeps saying 3 weeks.
I've got a
And
house just like that.
well, that's what I see on television, and it's infuriating to me because yeah, we can keep repeating that message, 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks, as the months pass. But the fact is, we're putting hundreds of thousands of lives at risk. Back in January or in February, President Trump was saying, "Well, we have just a few cases. We'll be down to 0 shortly." Okay, now he's acknowledging that we're facing possibly 100,000 deaths. And of course, Dr. Fauci is saying, well, it could be 100 or 200,000 deaths. And the fact is, if you look at these curves, you look at the actual data, there's no sign of flattening. There's no sign of a peak. So we could be talking about many hundreds of thousands of deaths and literally no end to this crisis, because all we're doing right now is applying very expensive Band-Aids. It's one half measure after another half measure. The only way to stop this is by universal testing. So go to howtostopthevirus.com. And I'm waiting for a link from the Glenn Beck people to the interview he did with me yesterday. And I'll get you that link as soon as I can. But the point is that, he and I had a very good discussion about this. He's 100% behind this idea. We need this idea to get some traction so that President Trump will take over. If he takes over and he says, like Captain Picard in Star Trek, if he says, "Make it so," it will happen. It'll happen.
Well, we've got a lot of good movers and shakers in the audience, and hopefully people will think this through. My question to you is, and when we get that link from Glenn Beck's show, we'll put that in on empoweryouohio.org. So people, please look for that. But with the problems we've had with this testing so far, how long would it take us to be able to make 323 million tests?
Well, we need 334 million. The population keeps going up, and I've been looking at those numbers. It's really fun. But how long would it take? Well, let's say the president offered, like the X Prize, he offered a $1 billion reward to the first company to produce a cheap, one-time use, throwaway device that can be used at home, to do this test. How long would it take? It would take, at most, I know, I've talked to people in the industry, if they had that kind of incentive, it would take at most a week, 10 days at the most. And then mass production, again, would start almost instantly. It would start within days, one or more companies mass producing these these devices, and then of course we start distributing. What you do is you'd go city by city, region by region. You probably start in the hot spots, and if you take a city, just like that little city in Italy, you start at one city, everyone gets tested, people self-isolate, the businesses could literally open the next day. So you go, area by area by area, state by state. No, this is, we're not talking about months. We're talking about weeks to get this thing rolling. And we have the capability.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Our main topic for today
And we
is,
may
of
come back
course,
to this one.
absolutely. Our main topic for today is something which, unfortunately, a lot of people were expressing concern about a month ago, and then, of course, the virus came. So all other topics have now disappeared from our consciousness. But the main topic, which we still need to be concerned about, is the ability of Google and other companies to rig elections. I have been studying this issue mainly with a long series of randomized controlled experiments since 2013. So I probably know more about the capabilities of these companies to shift opinions and attitudes and purchases and votes. I probably know more about this than anyone in the world because of the research program that I've been conducting. And I've published my work in outstanding scientific journals. I've presented it at scientific conferences. It's very serious work. My research adheres to the very highest standards of scientific excellence. And what I found is very disturbing. What I found is that a company like Google can shift opinions and votes on a massive scale with no one knowing that they're doing it, and without leaving a paper trail for authorities to trace. So the first type of new type of influence that I discovered is called SEME, S-E-M-E, that stands for Search Engine Manipulation Effect. And I first reported my findings back in 2013. The Washington Post wrote that up in a very, very good story. And then in 2015, I published my first set of experiments, which involved more than 4,000 people in 2 countries and involved two different national elections. And I found in those first experiments that if search results, and of course, most people in the world rely on just one search engine to get search results, that's Google's. If search results favor one candidate over another, that shifts the opinions and the voting preferences of people who are undecided. So maybe not you, because maybe you're not undecided, you know what you're voting for, but that shifts the opinions and votes of people who are undecided dramatically. We're talking about easily shifting 20% or more of those people, and up to 80% in some demographic groups. And that's based on one search. So in other words, if you're searching on an election-related topic, it might be the wall, for example, or immigration, and then Google responds with a bunch of search results. If high up in those results take you to a website that make one candidate look a lot better than the other candidate, well, you'll tend to believe what you're reading. You tend to believe that those high-ranking search results must be true, because people tend to believe, without really knowing the truth of the matter, but people believe that since search results are generated by a computer, by an algorithm, whatever that is, that the algorithm must be telling me the truth. It must be impartial because it's a computer. And so that's why SEAM is so powerful, because they trust Google and they trust high-ranking search results. And that is why, unfortunately, search results that favor one candidate over another shift opinions and votes on a massive scale. And Google knows this. Google knows that they have that power. So that was the first effect that we studied. We also learned through our experiments that you can cause those tremendous shifts in votes and voting preferences and opinions about candidates without anyone knowing that you're doing it. In other words, people can't see that there's bias in search results. Even I can't see it. If my staff shows me a list of search results, they're preparing for an experiment, I can't see the bias. I mean, how would you see the bias? You'd have to click on every single search result and look at the web pages and then kind of compare them. See, which, no one does that. Now, the experiments also showed, which something very disturbing, if we run a big experiment, and we've run several very large experiments involving thousands of people, one involving people from all over the United States, all 50 states, well, then you might have a couple of people, a few people, a handful who do see the bias, maybe because they're clicking on multiple pages and maybe they're doing comparisons. So a few people do see the bias, but guess what? Those people shift their opinions and their voting preferences even more, even farther in the direction of the bias, because they're saying to themselves, oh, look, the algorithm is favoring one candidate, say Hillary Clinton, therefore she must be the best candidate. And again, we're talking about people who are undecided, because all of our experiments start with people who are undecided on an issue or undecided on a candidate. And those are the people who decide who wins. It's the undecided. That's why all of the resources in our country, all of the advertising resources, all the persuasive resources that we have, they all get directed in the final months and weeks leading up to an election. They all get directed to states like Ohio. They get directed to states like Florida and Wisconsin. They get directed to swing states where there are a lot of undecided people. And President Trump, as you know, did not win the popular vote in 2016. In fact, Hillary won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. President Trump won the election because he had a total margin of 77,000 votes in, I believe it was 3 or 4 swing states. And so those swing voters, those undecided voters, those are the key to winning elections, especially close elections. And Google knows this. So if Google has so much power, how did Trump win? Obviously, Google was not a Trump fan. And in fact, 97% of donations from Google employees and Google executives and the company itself go to Democrats. And back in 2016, almost all the donations went to Hillary Clinton, whom I supported, by the way, because I actually lean left myself. And, so how did Trump win? If Google has all this power, how on earth did Trump win? Because
somebody at Google must have got fired for that, for sure. But do you have any sense from your research that at what level of Google management these decisions are being made?
Well, of course, I didn't have any sense of that for a long time, but what's happened in the last year is we have a bunch of people who have either been fired by Google or have quit Google and have blown the whistles very, very, very loudly. One of them I was just reading about recently, he actually has come out publicly pointing out that it's not content that matters anymore. Content like coming at us from Cambridge Analytica or from Russia, content does not actually shift opinions, not on a large scale. All that matters now, this is according to one of the Google whistleblowers, all that matters now is who controls the way content is presented. And around the world now, there are 2 companies that determine the content people will see or not see, and who determine what order the content is presented in. Those companies are Google, more than any other, and Facebook, to a much lesser extent Twitter and some other companies. But Google and Facebook, for most people in the world now, determine what content you'll see and what content you will never see, and they determine the order in which content is presented. So why did Trump win? Well, Trump won because these companies did not use the full powers that they had available to them. They did not use them, not to the extent that they could, because they were looking at the polls just like everyone else was. And the polls all said that this was a lock for Hillary Clinton. And, did they do anything to shift votes? Well, in 2016, I set up the first ever monitoring system, which allowed me to look over the shoulders of a very diverse group of 95 Americans in 24 states. And this is, of course, with their permission. So I'm looking over their shoulders. I'm accumulating, tabulating what they're seeing on their screens when they're doing election-related searches on Google, Bing, and Yahoo. So I'm doing what the Nielsen company does. You know the Nielsen company, they monitor people's television viewing habits.
Sure.
They do this by having a couple thousand families that are secret. They're all secret. Their identities are protected. And Nielsen, basically using a special device, keeps track of what they're watching on television, tabulates the data, and that determines which shows stay on the air, which shows get canceled, how much ads cost. That's exactly what we did in 2016, but we did it on people's computers, and what we were watching was search results they received on Google, Bing, and Yahoo that were election related. And they were generating these search results using neutral search terms, the kind of search terms that undecided voters would use. And we tabulated the data. We preserved more than 13,000 searches, election-related searches on Google, Bing, and Yahoo. We also preserved about 100,000 web pages to which the search results linked. This is the first ever monitoring project of its kind ever conducted in the world. Having preserved all of that data, we analyzed it to see whether there was any bias in Google, in the search results of those three companies, either for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. What we found was clear as day and highly statistically significant for those of you who know about stats, at the 0.001 level, meaning no doubt about it. What we found was that there was a pro-Hillary bias in all 10 search positions of Google search results on the first page of Google search results, but no such bias on Bing or Yahoo. So Google indeed was stacking the deck, and we calculated from the experiments that we've been conducting that was enough to have shifted somewhere between 2.6 and 10.4 million votes to Hillary Clinton, with no one knowing that this had occurred, because of course, except for us and our monitoring project, there's no record of search results. Search results are called ephemeral content. And Google employees, we've had leaks now of emails from their documents. Internally, they talk about, how can we use ephemeral content to shift people's opinions? They talk about that internally. They know. And so between 2.4 and 6 and 10, between 2.4 and 10.2 million votes were shifted to Hillary Clinton because of the bias in Google's search results without anyone knowing. And of course, again, because this is ephemeral content, there's no paper trail. There's no record. You can't go back in time and see what search results Google was showing people. So no awareness, no paper trail, and millions of votes shifted. Now, did they do everything? Yeah.
We've got a question from the audience, and I remind everyone, just go to the bottom of your screen and hit Q&A if you want to ask Dr. Epstein anything. But the question from Tom out there, we got a great crowd tonight. Thank you all for attending. It's a simple question. Is this legal?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I've been working with attorneys general from around the country now for quite a number of years. I've been working with members of Congress, and this is a key question that a lot of people are thinking about. There's no specific law or regulation that prohibits what Google is doing. In fact, the courts, when people have sued Google because, you know, they've been demoted in search rankings. The courts every single time, at least in the United States, have ruled for Google, saying that Google, by moving whatever it wants to move around in search results, is literally, believe it or not, expressing its own First Amendment right to free speech. And so the
Here's a,
courts have,
here's a question too, from Robert. Why would Google want Clinton to win over Trump? Just the obvious.
well, you have to understand there's a very close relationship between Hillary Clinton and Google. We have emails from literally the head of Google offering to run Hillary's tech campaign. The head of Google supervised Obama's tech campaigns in 2008 and 2012. There's very, very close ties there. But also keep in mind that it just simply has to do with who Google hires. So Google is hiring people like me. It's it's hiring people who graduate from prestigious schools in the Northeast. They tend to lean left, and again, 96-97% of donations from Google and its employees go to Democrats. So there's just that relationship there. Now, I can add to that some disturbing facts, which is that in Obama's second term, Google pretty much took over Washington, D.C. And that, of course, certainly would have continued under Hillary Clinton. So Obama's chief technology officer was former Google executive. Six federal agencies were headed by former Google executives. One of the first things Obama did when his second term began, January of 2013, was he shut down the ongoing antitrust investigation against Google. He just shut it down, even though the investigators had recommended that the investigation go forward. Obama literally just shut it down right after he was visited by in the White House by a Google representative. Obama's second term, 250 people shifted positions, high positions, between Google and the Obama administration. 250 people. That's a revolving door that's spinning very fast. And there were 450 visits to the White House by Google representatives. That's about 10 times more than any comparable company. So, this would have continued under Hillary Clinton. Under President Trump, and I'm not a Trump fan, but under President Trump, Google's been kicked out of Washington, and there are now investigations ongoing against Google by the Federal Trade Commission, Department of Justice, several congressional committees, and 51 attorneys general. They're conducting now a very aggressive antitrust investigation of Google. So, again, I'm not a Trump fan, but I can tell you that what's going to happen this time, what's going to happen this year is that Google and the other tech companies, they're not going to hold back. They're going to use every single type of manipulative tool they have available to them, and I'm now studying about a dozen of them. They're going to use every single tool they have available, and they can easily shift this year 15 million votes to the candidate of their choice, and it's definitely not Trump, without anyone knowing and without leaving a paper trail. 15 million votes, which means these companies will pick the next president of the United States. They'll also, of course, determine who's going to control the Senate. So in other words, if nothing is done to stop them, Washington, D.C. will be swept by Democrats, and all of these investigations will shut down, and these companies, Google especially, will consolidate and expand the powers that they already have, which are obscene, in my opinion. And that's pretty much guaranteed.
One of our guests asked the question between 2.6 and 10.4 million, or 10.2 million, I think. Why such a disparity?
Because based on the experiments we do, when we try to extrapolate from the experiments to the real world, we have to kind of make some assumptions. about who is seeing what and how many times they're seeing it and that type of thing. So we have to make some assumptions. So when I say that 2.6 million, I'm saying that's the absolute minimum that would have been shifted. Beyond that, it depends. It depends what happens when you show people biased search results over and over and over again for months. How high do the numbers get? How high does the proportion get? I don't even know that. That's obviously the number just gets larger and larger. What happens if you're not just using one technique, but you're using, three at the same time? For example, let's say your search suggestions, which we've studied, your search suggestions are kind of subtly pushing people towards, some web pages, but not others. We've studied that. We've shown just by manipulating search suggestions, we can turn a 50-50 split among undecided voters into a 90-10 split, with no one having the slightest idea that they're being manipulated. What happens if the answer boxes, those little boxes that Google shows you at the top of the page above the search results, what happens if the answer boxes are biased? And that indeed boosts the power of biased search results. In other words, it boosts the power of SEAM by another 10 to 30%. So in other words, when I say 2.6 million is a minimum, I mean, that's rock solid. The 10.4 million is a maximum. That's a guess, because we don't even know, how big that maximum could be. What we do know for sure is that Google and these other companies did not go all out in 2016. How do we know that? Well, for example, on election day in 2016, if Mark Zuckerberg had sent out a targeted message saying, go out and vote, and he sent that message just to Democrats, number one, no one would have known that he was doing that kind of targeting, because we weren't monitoring that and no one else was monitoring that. How would you know that it was just going to Democrats? And if he had done that, said go out and vote just to Democrats, that would have given Hillary Clinton that day at least 450,000 more votes. And how do we know that? We know that from Facebook's own published data, because they did an experiment that they didn't discuss with anyone, but they did an experiment during the 2010 election in which they sent go out and vote reminders to 60 million Facebook users. They had a control group. In 2012, they published an academic article in an academic journal with some of my colleagues from out here at the University of California, San Diego, showing that their go out and vote reminder got an additional 340,000 more people to vote who otherwise would not have voted that day. Well, it turns out there were a lot more voters, in 2016 than there were in 2010. If you just do the math, very simple math, you find out that if Zuckerberg sent out a go out and vote reminder just to Democrats, that would have given Hillary an additional 450,000 votes. Did he do it? No, of course he didn't do it, because that day he and everyone else just assumed that,
She was
she was the
going to win.
winner. She was going to win. So he
Now,
didn't do it. So he probably, has been kicking himself ever since.
yeah,
And maybe some people did get fired, but the point is, this time they're going to do every single thing they can
they're going to
do.
throw the kitchen sink at it. So, question from Lou: the numbers that you quote, Dr. Epstein, Google owns YouTube. Do your numbers include YouTube, or is that a whole nother different layer?
Wow, I am so glad you asked that question, because we started a couple of months ago a new line of research on what we're calling YME, which is the YouTube manipulation effect. I'm not going to give you every detail. Obviously, this is still ongoing research. But the point is, we have actually figured out how to measure the ability that YouTube has to shift opinions, attitudes, beliefs, purchases, and votes. And we'll start to have some numbers on this probably by the end of April. But basically, this is something now that we are in the process of quantifying. We know for sure that YouTube is an extremely powerful source of persuasion. Why? Because at present, and this sounds impossible, but it's actually true, at present, around the world, 70% of the videos that people watch on YouTube are suggested by Google's top secret up next algorithm, because YouTube is part of Google, and it's Google's algorithm that is suggesting the next video to watch, and then the next one after that, next one after that. And 70% of the videos people are watching right now are actually suggested by that algorithm. So in
And
other words,
YouTube is virtually on every single smart TV, like number one or two or three that people are taking a look at, I'm sure. So another question from Tom: does Google advise people and find about the way they choose selections like this?
Google does not advise people about how they determine these orderings, determine what they select and what they don't select. No, the two things that they have control over always are filtering and ordering. Filtering is, we're going to show certain content, we're going to suppress other content, which of course is censorship. And ordering is, putting things in a certain order. No, those are top secret issues within the company. But one of the videos that leaked from Google a few months ago, it was all of Google's leaders up on stage right after the 2016 election. This is an internal video from Google that leaked, and they were saying, we are not going to let this happen again. We will not let Trump be reelected. All of their leaders up on stage saying this. And then another video that leaked recently, it was leaked by a Google whistleblower named Zach Voorhees. Another video shows the head of YouTube. So glad that YouTube question got asked, because it shows the head of YouTube, her name is Susan Wojcicki, talking to her staff and explaining how they were tinkering with the YouTube up next algorithm to boost content that they think is legitimate, and to demote content, suppress content that they think is not legitimate. In other words, here's the head of YouTube saying, we are messing with this very powerful algorithm to boost content that we like, that we approve of. And the criteria, that are used to make those decisions, no, those are secret. Except that the whistleblowers are telling us that the company internally is not only supports Democrats, but is determined to make sure Trump is defeated. Now, let me repeat. I am not a Trump supporter, even though you might be able to see. Can you see my lapel pin? I don't know
We
if you can
do,
see
yeah.
that. Well, that's an American flag that has the presidential seal on it, so you can try to figure out for yourself how I got that. Even though I'm not a Trump supporter, let me tell you that I believe in democracy, the free and fair election, and the United States of America far more than I believe in any particular party or candidate. That's the first thing I said when I testified before Congress last summer, and it's still true. And the fact is, I would rather see the wrong person in office than to give away democracy to the tech companies. You know why? Because the tech companies are not accountable to us. They're accountable just to their shareholders. And Mark Zuckerberg, since he's the majority shareholder in Facebook, he's not even accountable to his shareholders. He's accountable to nobody. I don't
Yeah,
want our
it's kind of maddening.
country.
It's kind of
Yeah.
maddening to me, Dr. Epstein, that when we teach some political classes, but all political classes, that when we go to post something on Facebook about an educational session or something like that, we can't even post hardly anything at all on Facebook anymore. They censor it. But I guess my question, you've got a lot of free market people out there in the audience tonight, and you say that Bing, when you did your study, that Bing and Yahoo, they weren't biased at all. And so my question is, for all these free market people like myself, is it just too hard to use those other search engines? Do we not have the ability to understand this and change directions? Is Google just too big of a monopoly?
Let's put it this way. At the moment, uh, around the world, Google, about 92% of search is done on Google. The next most influential search engine is Bing, and all they're drawing is around 2% of search. So they have no impact on elections. How do you break Google's monopoly? There are lots of people talking about laws and regulations. That's really not going to work, believe it or not. There's only one way to break Google's worldwide monopoly on search. I testified testified that about I testified about that before a Senate committee last July. And the day before my testimony, I published an article about how to do this in Bloomberg Businessweek. So if you're interested in how to quickly end Google's worldwide monopoly on search, look up my article that was published again in Bloomberg Businessweek last summer. If you go to mygoogleresearch.com, that's a place where you can support my research if you choose to, but also more importantly, you can learn about my research and you can get links to all of the studies I've done, and you can link to that article in Businessweek, which explains very simply how to end Google's worldwide monopoly on search. This is a very light touch, very, very light touch regulation. It is simply a matter of making what they call their index, which is the database they use to generate search results, making their index public, making it into what's called in law, a public commons, just like a park, that is declared a public commons so everyone can go there. And if you make their index public, then what would happen is within months, certainly within a year or two, there'd be thousands of other search platforms built, catering to different audiences and drawing on Google's fabulous index. So that all of these search platforms would be giving great search results, but they would be using their own filtering and ordering rules, depending on the audience that they're catering to. So there might be search platforms that cater to women, that cater to Republicans, cater to conservatives, cater to Lithuanians. In other words, you'd have thousands of search platforms all giving very good search results, but appealing to different audiences. This is exactly how news media works right now. There's thousands of news sources, some catering to one kind of audience, like Fox News, and others catering to other audiences like MSNBC or CNN or the New York Times. That's what will happen if we make Google's index public, which is, as I say, a very light touch regulation. That's what will happen. In other words, it will make search competitive again, as it was in the beginning. Google was not the first search engine. They were the 21st search engine. And they didn't start to dominate search until quite a while after they started. I think until maybe 2005 or so. So, for a while, search was very competitive. The other advantage of adopting my plan and making their search index public, another advantage is you would see tremendous innovation in search. There has been no innovation in search for almost 20 years because of Google's monopoly. It's very, very
sad.
Got a couple
questions for you. Got a couple questions for you, my friend
Sure.
Gene. Is the key to overcoming Google and Facebook bias declaring them publishers rather than platforms?
Well, at the moment, one of the legal protections that they have is from a federal statute, which is called the Communications and Decency Act, and it's specifically Section 230 of that act. Section 230 is affectionately known as the Safe Harbor Act, or the Safe Harbor Clause, because it allows platforms, it prevents them from being sued for the content that they post. And so sometimes when people go after these platforms like Google and Facebook, they hide behind Section 230. Sometimes they hide behind the First Amendment. Right now, there are people like Senator Cruz and others who are trying to see if they can modify Section 230 in some way so that these companies can't hide behind it. You know what? I think that's great, but that doesn't take away Google's monopoly on search. Not at all. And it doesn't solve these big problems. The three big problems are the massive surveillance, the massive censorship, and of course what I study in my experiments, the massive manipulation. And if we removed the protections that these companies have under Section 230, guess what? We still have those three big problems: censorship, manipulation, surveillance. It doesn't really help. So you have to do, as I say, I know, I don't know how to solve every problem in the world, but I know how to solve the Google problem, and that is by making their index public. And for that matter, I'm pretty sure I know how to solve the coronavirus problem
Well,
too.
we've got a question on that. I've just got one more kind of Google question. And then anybody that
Sure.
has any coronavirus questions, please fire them up right now because we're nearing the end of our program. But kind of the last question about Google. Do you have any opinion on the DuckDuckGo search engine? That's from Greg.
Well, yes, I do, because DuckDuckGo is not a search engine. So if you like it, if it serves your needs, go ahead and use it. They do preserve people's privacy, which, to their credit. But it's not actually a search engine. It's to be a search engine, you have to have what's called a crawler programs crawling all over the internet 24/7, and Google does that more than anyone and more aggressively than anyone. In fact, hardly anyone, because of Google's monopoly, hardly anyone crawls anymore. DuckDuckGo does a tiny, 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 tiny bit of crawling, but in fact, they're giving you most of the results based on databases that are not their own databases. It's not even a search engine. So I prefer right now using a search engine which has a terrible name. It's called Swiss Cows, SwissCows.com. It's based in Switzerland, so there are very strict laws there that protect people's privacy. In my opinion, they give very good search results, and they really are pulling results from other search engines that actually do crawling. So that's my favorite right now, SwissCows.com. If you want to get all of my tips all at once, and this article keeps getting outdated so quickly. I mean, I don't even have Swiss cows in there yet. But go to my7simplesteps.com. You can spell out the 7 or not. It doesn't matter.
We'll try to put that up.
My7simplesteps.com.
We'll try to put that up on Empower. My seven simple steps. So
My7simplesteps.com. But let me just interrupt for 1 second. I apologize. But that essay begins with the sentence, "I have not received a targeted ad on my cell phone or computer since 2014. So it can be done. You can actually use the internet and preserve your privacy and the privacy of your kids and your family. It can be done.
So when we were talking about the coronavirus to start out our discussion, Dr. Epstein, I just have enjoyed talking to you so much because you're just such a big thinker, and this is such a big problem. And DPM asked the question early on, and I guess I thought the same question: if testing everyone, how can you get people to self-isolate? In other words, it depends on a reasonable public, which sometimes we don't have. He said, don't get me wrong, I like the idea, but I don't know if it will work, but it may help a lot. Thoughts on, would people self-isolate, or would people need to be isolated by the law?
The vast majority of people, I mean, I've been a psychologist for almost 40 years. I can tell you without any doubt, the vast majority of carriers would self-isolate on their own. But, we're Americans. So if you really want to get a lot of cooperation, you just add a financial incentive. And, given the trillions and trillions of dollars now that are that are being spent, on these bailout bills, it would be very inexpensive, much, much, much less expensive to just give people financial incentives for staying home, for self-isolating. We could add to that, that's the carrot, but we could add a stick, of course. There could be a penalty for someone who knowingly, transmits the virus to someone else. That could be made a crime. But I think basically the vast majority of people, call it 1 million right now, who are carriers, would just voluntarily self-isolate, because look at the upside of this. The moment that happens, we can reopen the economy, and that's what's killing everyone right now. Is the economy is closed. I can't access my doctor. I can't access my cardiologist. You see what I'm saying? I can't. Everything is shut, and with
The upside is
universal
big.
testing, yeah, the upside is so huge, and I think people would get that. There'd have to be a lot of messaging, of course, encouraging people, praising people for self-isolating. Financial incentives would certainly help tremendously, but honestly, I believe that the vast majority of carriers would just voluntarily self-isolate. I saw what happened again when my kids came back from Spain. They're 19 and 21 years old. And I saw what happened when they came back. I didn't discuss it with them. They wiped down the railings, shut themselves in their bedrooms, and that was that. And then for 2 weeks, which just ended, I didn't see them. I didn't see them, and I got text messages, of course, and phone calls and all that stuff. But they just quarantined themselves, and they were not sick. They're still not sick, but they just did it anyway out of caution. But see, we don't want everyone self-isolating. We don't want all old people self-isolating. The only people who need to self-isolate are the carriers. Then the problem is solved.
And one person kind of said, well, I'm kind of suspicious of the government. How would this thing be recorded? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm extremely suspicious of the government, but this is a situation where all the government would be doing is a kind of nudging, some big companies to get going on this. And after that, if you think about it, a lot of what happens at that point is just in our own hands. Because as soon as these devices, these little throwaway devices are produced by the hundreds of millions, we just grab them. Wouldn't you want to self-test? I mean, I would. I want everyone in my family to do it. Everyone would do it. The vast majority of us, 333 million of us, would test negative, and we can restart our lives. So I don't think this is a situation where we have to worry about the government doing something evil. The government just has to, President Trump has to take the lead, take the credit, take the glory. He'll go down in history as saving not just the United States, not just our economy, but if you think about it, within a couple months, he could take credit for saving the whole world, because everyone in the world needs to be tested. If we're taking the lead there, and we've developed that ultra cheap technology and the mass production capability, maybe working with other countries rather, that have enormous production capability like China, Trump will be seen as a great hero, and he will go down in history
The
as
last
a great hero.
question. The last question I've got for you. So you've got 95 people who have been listening to you tonight. Most of them are engaged wherever they live in their government. What is the one thing that some of those people could do to get your idea kicked around a little bit more and heard? Is there anything you could ask them to do?
Well, first of all, if you're on Twitter and you have any kind of following, please go to my Twitter page, which is at Dr. That's Dr. and then my first initial R, Epstein. So Dr. R. Epstein. Go there, retweet my tweets, which talk about this article, or go to Glenn Beck's website, retweet his tweets that talk about this solution to the problem. Contact your local member of Congress. In other words, spread this idea. If we can give this idea some traction over the next few days. Again, I'm in touch with people at the White House. I'm in touch with a member of the Trump family. If the president sees some genuine interest here, again, I know people who have the ability to talk to him directly, and it's all it's going to take is President Trump saying, "Make it so," and this crisis will be over in a matter of weeks, not months or years.
We're just hearing so much noise
Sure.
as citizens on things that don't seem like they're going to accomplish anything. We need to look at other options, and I'm so appreciative of you of taking your time out today. And this is really our first completely virtual webinar, and I don't know how to do virtual applause for you, but I'm just thanking you
Thank you.
very much for visiting with Empower You tonight, and we wish you well with everything you're working on. Thank you very much, Dr. Epstein. And for those who will be with us, please join us Thursday night for an explanation of the CARES program with Attorney Christopher Fitt, and be watching for more programs over the next several weeks. Thank you for coming and joining Empower You. Good night, everyone.